Hello everybody and welcome back to the Creature Flesh Workshop. Now we are currently in the stage of testing out some of the materials we are going to be using in our final piece, which is this Dragear silicone monster mask. Now before we get to that point, we want to make sure that we're completely comfortable with the materials that we're using. Now in the first video of this testing phase, we created this little piece here. This is a resin mold that we created from a sculpt that we also did in that episode. Just a little kind of test piece, got some nice textures, some skin textures, wrinkles, to try and replicate some of the things that we're going to see on our mask. Now we've got this little guy here, what we can now do is we can take a cast from it using silicone. So that's the next stage. So we're now going to be mixing up some silicone and painting it up. Maybe doing some other little bits to it as well. So let's get on with it. So we've got our silicone ready to be poured into the mold. So we're using a platinum silicone. So this is a prosthetics grade silicone. The actual silicone is Platsil Gel 0020. It comes in a part A and part B, and it's a 1:1 mix ratio. So it means that both weights, part A and B, are equal. They mix together and they cure to make the silicone rubber. Now a little bit about platinum silicone and actually the way that silicone is measured. Silicone is measured by Shore hardness. So 00 being the softest, and then it goes up to gel 10, gel 25, and it makes for a harder, more rubbery kind of silicone. So really for prosthetics you want the softest silicone possible. But the softer the silicone, the more prone it is to tearing. So that's why we're using this, which is a fairly new developed silicone, I believe, 0020. So it's 00, it's very, very soft. It really is designed to be used for applications such as silicone masks. So it's perfect for what we want to use it for. So the first thing we need to do is mix the silicone. Now with this silicone, we've actually got quite a long working time with it. Historically, silicones have quite a short pot life, meaning that once you've mixed part A and part B together, you've only got about 6-8 minutes before it starts to cure, and then once it's got past that point, you're unable to pour it, you're unable to sculpt it or smooth it, and it starts to harden. With 0020, however, we actually have about a 40-45 minute working time with this. So this is really, really great. When we're pouring our larger pieces, such as our silicone mask, we want to take our time, pour it slowly to make sure that we get all those air bubbles out and not have to rush that process. It can then be demolded, so taken out of its mold, in about 2 hours time. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. So it's got the benefits of having a longer life in the pot, but also the benefits of being taken out of the mold pretty quickly as well. So let's mix some of this together. Now a clever little trick to work out how much silicone we're actually going to need in this piece is to weigh the clay that we used in the original sculpt. So we've got most of it here, give or take. So this weighs 91 grams. Now to work out how much we actually need, we just have to do one simple calculation, and that's 70% of the weight of the clay. So this is about 91, we'll round that up to about 100 because there's a few bits missing on the clay. So we're going to go with about 70 grams of silicone, and that is hopefully going to give us enough to fill up the mold. Now usually I would probably pigment the part A first because we generally have quite a short pot life, but because the 0020 has a 40-minute pot life, it doesn't really matter if we mix part A and part B, it actually means that we can demold it a little bit quicker. It's also really important that we make sure we use 2 separate sticks, mixing sticks for part A and part B, because we don't want to contaminate either one with their counterpart. Silicone isn't really that cheap, so you want to be pretty careful not to mix them in the pots. Now while mixing, we are incorporating quite a lot of bubbles, but that's where our degassing chamber comes in. Okay, so we want our base coat to be the lightest shade of color in our mask. Because the thing with silicone, because it is semi-transparent, you can't really go lighter, you can only go darker. So we want to make sure that our base coat is the lightest possible. If we can pigment the base coat to the base color we want for the mask, it saves us a lot of effort. But we want to make sure we get that bit right. Now for our Dragir silicone mask, he's going to be kind of an undead character. We don't really want to be using a nice fleshy skin tone. We're probably going to go for some more kind of greens, yellows. We've actually got a paint system order we're going to be kind of going by, which is our flesh tone, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later when we come to painting the piece. But for now, we're just going to be pigmenting this silicone here. So I've got these silicone pigments just here. These are actually pretty pricey. You can also, if you're using it for smaller pieces such as painting, you can also use oil paints. They actually make pretty good pigments. But this stuff is generally pretty highly concentrated, so you don't need a lot. And it's better to add a little at a time. It's also a very good idea to set a timer as soon as you mix your silicones to know exactly how long you've got left. Remember, this is just the base coat, so we can always go darker, we can never go lighter. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I think we can go ahead and degas it. Okay, so this is the first time pulling a vacuum. Let's pop our silicone into the chamber. Now you can see that it's got a good amount of space to rise. Okay, my bad, I forgot to turn the valve. Let's try again. You can see the bubbles there coming out. That is pretty cool. So we'll just let it do its thing, and it should just collapse on itself. There it goes. Okay, now we're going to release it. And we should be bubble free and ready to pour. Okay, so now we have our vacuumed silicone. We've got our mold here, so we're now ready to pour. Now it's still a good idea to pour from a height, because that will stretch any bubbles, even though there shouldn't be. Looks pretty damn good already. And it's looking like our 70% calculation is pretty good. Okay, so all we've got to do now is wait until we can demold this, and that's going to be in about 2 hours time. So in the meantime, I'm going to get on with some little tweaks to our mask to make sure that it's ready for moulding. Okay, so it is actually the next day, so we've given this a good while to cure. Now, something quick to mention about silicone is once you've cured it, it takes about 72 hours to fully cure. So it's always a good idea to paint your silicone within that time, because we only paint silicone with more silicone, because the only thing that sticks to silicone really is silicone. The great thing about that though is once we've painted it within that space of time, your paint and your piece will actually become one, and you won't have any problems with it peeling or anything like that. So you're going to have a nice strong piece that's going to last for a long, long time. So this is the exciting bit. We get to demold this test piece here. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to take a little bit of our baby powder here, and we are just going to give it a little brush. And then this is really going to help us kind of tease this out. With our masks, it's not quite so bad because they're quite thick, quite big pieces. But actually, when you're doing things like prosthetics, it's always a good idea just to tease it out with a bit of this. helps with things like sticking. If we've got some thin pieces on there, we don't want it to rip too much. Looks like this is actually coming out of here pretty well actually. And as you can see, I didn't actually put any mold release in this, and it's actually come out absolutely fine, no problems with sticking. And there we go. Now that is looking pretty cool. You can see here it's really picked up the detail from our mold here. It has picked up a few little imperfections there. I mean, to be honest, that's probably where I haven't cleaned out the mold properly, but this is only a test piece. It doesn't matter too much. We do, however, want to make sure that we clean out our final mold pretty well. But you can really see that actually, because the silicone is really, really soft, it moves just like real flesh. So when we've got this on and we're actually wearing this as a mask, it's going to look super, super cool. You can see just how soft it is by sort of manipulating it and moving it around. It really is perfect for mask making and getting a hyper-realistic mask. So the next stage is going to be painting this piece, so testing out some of our paint systems. So we have a paint system specifically for flesh. We're going to tweak it because we want this to look not necessarily alive but dead, but we are going to stick by that paint system because it really, really works. And let's talk about that now. So this is our flesh tone paint system. So you can see here we've got a specific order that we paint in, and that starts with titanium white, phthalo blue, sap green, violet, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, Elzurian crimson and burnt umber. Now there's a specific reason why we do them in this order, and they're from the lightest colour to the darkest colour that we want to use. Now this is going to give a normal coloured kind of flesh tone. The reason that we go from light to dark is because silicone has a certain amount of translucency to it. So once you've gone darker, it's really, really tough to go lighter on the piece. So we want to make sure that we do it in this order to get the best look for the skin, to get that nice translucency that makes it look realistic. And we're probably going to play around with these colours. You know, this is going to be a normal flesh tone. You know, we want something that looks essentially undead, so we are going to play around with these. You know, we're not going to use so many reds, maybe more blues, more greens. Probably going to have to look at some pretty nasty reference images. But I think it's going to be fun, and I think it's going to give us a great idea of what our mask is going to look like. Okay, so we have everything set out. We've got our colour system here, going from white to burnt umber. We've got a few other things on the table here as well. So we've got these nice little mixing cups. These are really cool because they're kind of reusable. They're a little bit flexible as well, so it's easy to get them cleaned out. Some little mixing sticks. This is a great tip actually, we've marked our A and B stick, and that's going to be for mixing our A and B components in the silicone to make sure that we don't get them mixed up, because we're going to be kind of dipping in and out of these. We really want to make sure that we're not contaminating either one or the other with part A or part B. So they are going to stay in their corresponding pots. Okay, so I think that is pretty much our initial skin color done. I'm sure we're going to make a few tweaks in our final piece, but I'm pretty happy with that at the moment. What we need to do now is get in there with an airbrush. Now, before we move on to airbrushing, something I do want to show you here is actually some of the movement that we can get with this, and the way that it changes the shapes that we've sculpted. And you can see that you get some pretty gnarly looking stuff when we move this around. We're also going to take the shine off this to make it look a little bit more like skin texture, but you can really see that when we're going to be wearing our mask and moving it around, you're going to get some quite nice movement with that. So we are at our airbrush station. We've got our piece on our turntable here. You can see if we move the light around, you can actually see some really nice contrast between those wrinkles and lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to go at this with the airbrush in some of our creases and crevices just in there. We want to get some nice contrast between those high points and the low points. So again, we're keeping it very subtle. We're just going to go in with that airbrush. Okay, so our test piece is done. We've painted all of our layers on there, we've done a bit of airbrushing on there. I think it's looking really, really cool, and it gives us a snapshot of what our final piece, our Dragear silicone mask, is going to potentially look like, which is super, super exciting. Now, there's a few things that I would change on here. This is a very small piece, so we've got to remember that on a larger piece, we've got much more room to do veins and various different details on there. This is very much a piece of flesh that we can just paint on. It's given us a good idea of what we're going to be able to achieve. There's a few other little bits though that we need to do to completely finish this off. So one thing is we want to stick these teeth back in, and this is the reason that I've done this is because we are going to be sticking our teeth on our mask back in, and I want to make sure that this particular glue, this silicone glue, is going to work. So I'm going to take a little spatula and we're just going to put some of this glue into the places where our teeth were sitting. The nice thing about, or the reason we have to use silicone glue again is because nothing else really sticks to silicone, not even super glues. It's just a really, really tough material to work with sometimes. But also we're using silicone glue because we want our piece to stay flexible. Silicone glue will do just that. So we've got those teeth stuck in. That looks pretty gross. So we're going to leave that to set, and we'll check on that on the next episode, hopefully. But the last thing we want to do is we actually need to mat this down. Now, there may be some silicone mask applications where we do want to have kind of a shiny piece, but in this instance we don't. We want it to look more like flesh. The flesh doesn't necessarily have that shininess to it like silicone does, and it's a little bit tacky as well. It's probably still curing, to be honest. So what we're going to do is we need to mat that down with some of this stuff, which is a translucent or transparent powder. So this is kind of a makeup powder, a little bit. So you can see that actually gives it a really nice matte finish, and it just makes all of those details a little bit more subtle. So that's it, we've done our test piece. Now we've got this cool little piece of skin now that we can play around with and really kind of get an idea of what our Dragear mask is really going to look like in the end, hopefully. As always, thank you again for joining us on this journey, and next time we will be preparing this guy for moulding. It's a scary time because we put so much time and effort into this guy, but I'm pretty confident with the materials because we've done all of our testing. So again, thank you. See you on the next one.